Grace Williams walks into Ridgeway Motors, calm, confident, ready to buy a car. But before she can speak, the smiles fade. The manager steps forward, his voice sharp. "Lady, you can't afford these cars. Leave now, before I call security." And then he does, calling two guards who move toward her as the room watches in silence. Grace doesn't flinch. She just looks him in the eye and smiles. Because before this day is over, Grace Williams will own the place. Grace was 56, tall, graceful, with silver threads glinting in her soft black curls. She carried herself with the calm of someone who'd built her own life, brick by brick. An accountant, a mother, a quiet storm who'd learned long ago that respect isn't given. It's earned, often twice over. That morning, she'd finished a meeting downtown, balancing her laptop bag and a paper cup of tea. Her old Toyota had been coughing like a smoker for months. She smiled at the thought. "You've been good to me, old girl," she whispered, patting the dashboard. "But I think it's time." Ridgeway Motors gleamed ahead, a glass castle full of chrome and confidence. Cars worth more than some houses lined the lot, each one shining like a promise. Grace felt a flicker of excitement as she parked and stepped out. Inside, the air smelled like leather and money. Polished floors, soft jazz, salesmen in suits that cost more than rent. Grace smoothed her jacket and walked in with quiet confidence. A young salesman spotted her from behind the counter. His smile was polite, but his eyes gave him away. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Can I help you? I'm looking for something reliable," she said. "Maybe one of your hybrids." He hesitated, his gaze flicking to her shoes, her handbag, her skin. "Our vehicles start around 80,000, he said carefully. "We do have pre-owned models at our sister lot, if you'd prefer." Grace cut him off with a calm smile. "I'll decide what I prefer once I've looked." She moved past him before he could answer, heels tapping on marble like punctuation marks. From the corner, two other salesmen watched. One whispered something that made the other chuckle. Grace felt it, the low buzz of judgment in the air. It was subtle, practiced, the kind you can't prove but never forget. An older man with slicked-back hair finally approached. His name tag read Howard. He carried the forced charm of someone who'd sold too many lies and called it experience. "Good afternoon. Howard Benson, floor manager. How can I assist you today?" Grace smiled. "I'm interested in the Ridgeway LX." He blinked. "Ah, our most exclusive model. Financing options for that one start at—" "No financing," she said, her voice even. "I'll be paying in full." Something shifted in his expression. The corners of his mouth twitched like he didn't quite believe her. "Of course," he said slowly. "Well, before we move forward, I'll just need to run a quick background check." "Standard policy. Background check," she repeated, raising a brow. "For a cash purchase?" He gave a thin smile. "Just how we do things here." Grace stood there for a long second, watching him. His tone, his posture, it wasn't policy, it was assumption. Finally, she nodded once, tight and measured. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Benson." She turned and walked out without another word. The autumn air hit her face like a reminder. Cool, clean, grounding. She climbed into her car, closed the door, and just sat there for a moment. Her hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel. She'd been through worse. She'd seen worse. But there was something about the quiet humiliation of that moment. The way they'd looked through her, as if success couldn't possibly wear her face, that stayed with her. On the drive home, the city blurred by in shades of gold and gray. By the time she reached her driveway, her sadness had cooled into something sharper. Grace poured herself a glass of water, sat at the kitchen table, and opened her laptop. The glow of the screen lit her face as she typed, slow and deliberate. She wasn't the kind to raise her voice, but she knew how to make numbers move. And if there's one thing life had taught Grace Williams, it's that sometimes the quietest storm does the most damage. That night, she made a phone call to someone she hadn't spoken to in years. A woman who owed her a favor, Clara, she said softly. "I think it's time we did something bold." There was a pause on the line, then a chuckle. "Grace Williams," Clara said. "Every time you call, the world trembles a little." What's the plan? Grace smiled, a slow, steady smile. Oh, just a little business acquisition. The next morning, the men at Ridgeway Motors would wake up to find out that the woman they dismissed had just become their new boss. The morning light broke over the city like a quiet drum roll. Inside Ridgeway Motors, the coffee machine hissed, phones rang, and the salesmen circled the floor, waiting for another day of deals and egos. None of them had any idea that the storm they'd brewed was about to roll through their front doors, wearing heels and a smile. Grace Williams didn't sleep much that night. She didn't need to. Once she made up her mind, she moved with purpose. By sunrise, she'd made the call to her attorney. By 8, she'd wired the funds. By 10, the ink was drying on a deal that would make her the majority owner of Ridgeway Motors. She arrived just before noon, wearing a navy suit and a calm expression that could slice through glass. When she stepped inside, the young salesman from the day before, Tom, his name tag read, spotted her first. His face twisted in surprise. "Ma'am, you're back," he stammered. "Seems so," Grace said lightly. "Is your manager in?" Howard Benson appeared from his office, irritation already forming in his eyes. "Mrs. Williams," he said, forcing a laugh. "If this is about yesterday—" "Oh, it is," she said. "And don't worry. I won't take much of your time." Before he could reply, a tall man in a charcoal suit entered behind her. Mr. Hill, the regional director. He carried a folder under his arm and an expression that could only be described as apologetic. "Howard," Hill said, nodding toward Grace, "meet your new employer." The room froze. Phones went quiet. The young salesman's mouth fell open. Howard blinked, his face turning pale. "Excuse me?" Grace offered her hand. Grace Williams, owner, Ridgeway Motors, as of 32 minutes ago. The silence that followed felt almost holy. Howard's voice cracked. There must be some mistake." "No mistake," Hill said. "The previous owner sold his controlling shares this morning. Mrs. Williams is now in charge." Grace looked around the showroom, her gaze steady but calm. "I'd like to start with a staff meeting," she said. Right here, right now, they gathered in a semicircle. Men in suits, women behind desks, a few mechanics peering in from the service bay. Grace stood before them, hands clasped in front of her. "Yesterday," she began, "I came here as a customer. I was dismissed, judged, and treated like an inconvenience. Not because I couldn't afford the car, but because some people thought I didn't belong in this room." She paused. No one spoke. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. "I've spent my whole life being told to stay quiet, stay polite, stay grateful. And I did, until I realized silence only serves the people who benefit from it. So I stopped being quiet." Her voice was low, but every word landed like a hammer wrapped in velvet. "I didn't buy this place to humiliate anyone. I bought it to fix it, to build something better, a business that judges people by their honesty, not their credit score. By their respect, not their reflection." Tom, the young salesman, shifted on his feet. "Ma'am, I didn't mean to—" Grace turned to him, her gaze soft but direct. "I know," she said, "but meaning well isn't the same as doing right. Learn the difference. You'll be fine." Then she faced Howard. "As for you, Mr. Benson, you've had a long run here. I think it's time for a break. Effective immediately." Howard swallowed hard. "You're firing me?" "No," she said evenly. "I'm freeing you." Later that afternoon, the staff began to see a new rhythm take shape. Grace moved through the building with quiet command, meeting the mechanics, listening to the receptionists, asking questions no one had ever thought to ask. She replaced the old elite buyer's lounge with a customer cafe that served free coffee to everyone, not just the rich clients. She hired 2 women from her church to handle finance applications, both known for their integrity and patience. And she made a promise, to herself and to everyone watching, that no one who walked into Ridgeway Motors would ever feel small again. Word spread fast. Within a week, new customers poured in. People who'd been turned away before, people who'd heard about the lady who changed the game. Grace sat in her new office one evening, looking out through the glass at the sunset glinting off the cars. Her phone buzzed. It was her son, Marcus. "Mom," he said, half laughing, "you really bought a dealership?" "Seems I did," she said. "Because they disrespected you?" "No," she said softly. "Because they reminded me who I am." That night, after everyone left, Grace walked the quiet showroom alone. The lights above shimmered against polished metal and glass. She ran her fingers along the hood of a car, the same model she'd wanted the day before. For the first time, she didn't feel like a visitor. She felt like she'd come home. Outside, the city lights blinked awake, and the wind carried the sound of her heels down the street. Steady, certain, unshakable. Grace Williams had turned humiliation into ownership, pain into power. And though she'd never say it out loud, she knew the truth deep in her bones. Some storms don't destroy you. They reveal you. The next few weeks moved like a dream, part triumph, part trial. Grace Williams had stepped into power with quiet confidence, but she knew better than to mistake victory for peace. Owning Ridgeway Motors was more than a headline. It was a challenge. Behind every handshake and forced smile, she could feel the weight of resistance pressing against her. Old habits die hard, and in that building, some weren't ready to change. It began subtly. Invoices misplaced, calls forgotten, emails mysteriously deleted. Howard Benson's allies, the ones too comfortable with the old ways, had started to push back. They didn't say it out loud, but Grace saw it in their eyes. The disbelief that a black woman now held the keys to everything they thought they owned. She didn't confront them right away. Grace understood power wasn't about shouting. It was about watching, listening, gathering truth until it was undeniable. So she smiled through the tension. She walked the floors each morning, greeting every employee by name. She studied the ledgers, reviewed the finances, and quietly began to map out the cracks beneath the polished surface. One evening, long after closing, she sat alone in her office. Flipping through reports, the numbers didn't add up. Money was leaking somewhere, slowly, cleverly. She highlighted figures, compared accounts, then reached for her phone. "Clara," she said, her voice low but steady. "Still up?" came the warm chuckle on the other end. "Always," Grace replied. "I need your eyes on something." Clara was more than an old friend. She was a retired auditor, sharp as a blade. Together, they combed through months of transactions, tracing every dollar. By midnight, the truth surfaced like oil in water. Howard Benson hadn't just been rude. He'd been corrupt, a secret slush fund, fake vendor payments, backdoor deals with city inspectors. He hadn't worked alone either. 2 other staff members were helping cover his tracks. Grace leaned back in her chair, the hum of the fluorescent light filling the silence. It wasn't just disrespect anymore. It was theft, the kind that steals more than money. It steals trust. The next morning, Grace arrived early. The air outside was cold enough to sting, but her steps were sure and even. She called an emergency meeting. The staff gathered again, eyes wary, whispers rippling through the room. Grace stood in front holding a folder. Inside was the evidence: signed receipts, duplicate payments, wire records. "I know some of you are still adjusting to change," she began, her tone calm, measured. "But there's something I won't adjust to, and that's dishonesty." She set the folder down on the counter with a quiet thud. For years, this place has been losing money. Not because of customers, not because of market trends, but because of greed. Some of that greed came from right here. A murmur swept through the crowd. Grace looked directly at the 2 men standing near the back, their faces drained of color. "I could call the police right now," she said, "but I won't, yet. You'll both return every cent you took, and you'll hand over full written confessions by noon. Then you'll never step foot in this building again." No one moved. Grace didn't blink. Finally, one of them, Jerry, a sales manager, nodded slowly, eyes wet with shame. "Yes, ma'am," he whispered. The other just turned and walked out. Grace exhaled, the tension leaving her shoulders like a slow sigh. That afternoon, she gathered her core team, the ones who'd stayed loyal, who believed in what she was building. She didn't talk about punishment. She talked about purpose. "We're not just selling cars. she said. "We're building trust. People come here with their savings, their hopes, their families. When they walk through those doors, they should feel seen, safe, respected." Her assistant, Lydia, a young black woman just starting her career, smiled softly. "You make it sound like church," Grace laughed. "In a way, it is. Faith in people. Faith in fairness. That's what keeps this engine running." By the end of the week, Grace launched something new. A community care program, offering fair credit options for working families and free financial workshops led by her own accounting firm. She invited local reporters to cover it, not for fame, but for message. Ridgway Motors was under new management, in every sense of the word. The article went viral overnight. Photos of Grace standing in front of the dealership, smiling beside a young couple picking up their first car, flooded social media, and beneath it all, her words echoed like a quiet anthem. Dignity isn't luxury. It's a right. One night, after the buzz had faded, Grace drove through the city with the windows down, the cool air brushing her cheeks. The radio played an old Sam Cooke song, smooth and soulful. She pulled over by the river, watching the water shimmer under the streetlights. For the first time in a long time, she felt both tired and free. When she looked at her reflection in the window, she didn't see the woman who'd been humiliated weeks ago. She saw a leader, a fighter, a woman who had turned the world's no into her own resounding yes. And somewhere deep inside, she smiled, not with pride, but with peace. Because Grace Williams had learned the truth that day. Power isn't about control. It's about creation, and she was just getting started. Winter crept into the city quietly, like an old friend who knew not to knock. By December, Ridgway Motors had changed more than its owner. It had changed its heart. Customers came in with curious smiles, expecting the usual hard sell, and left with something else. Trust. Grace could feel it in the air now. The building no longer hummed with ego. It breathed. It lived. Still, peace never comes without a test. One Friday afternoon, Grace sat in her office when Lydia rushed in, breathless, clutching her tablet. "Ms. Williams, you need to see this." On the screen was an online news post, a local blog known for gossip and half-truths. The headline screamed, "New owner of Ridgway Motors accused of misusing city funds." Grace frowned. Below the headline, the article hinted that her community outreach program was a front for funneling city grant money into her personal business. No evidence, just loaded words and anonymous sources. She scrolled further. There was a quote from an unnamed former employee, Howard Benson. Grace sat back, the edges of her calm trembling. She wasn't angry yet, but she could feel the familiar chill of injustice creeping close again. "Who's sharing it?" she asked. "Everyone," Lydia said softly. "It's spreading fast." Grace closed her eyes for a moment. She'd worked too hard, fought too long to let lies undo her. But she also knew what silence could cost. "Get Clara," she said. "We're not playing defense. We're going to the source." By evening, Grace and Clara sat across from a young journalist at a coffee shop downtown, a man barely 30, with ink-stained fingers and too much confidence. He looked surprised when Grace arrived. "Mrs. Williams," he said. "Didn't expect you'd come in person." "I find it's better than watching strangers write my story," she said evenly. Clara set a thick folder on the table. Inside was everything. The city grant paperwork, the financial statements, and the signed authorization from the mayor's office. All clean, all verifiable. Grace leaned forward. "You wrote something untrue. Now I'm giving you the chance to fix it." He hesitated. "Look, I didn't say you did anything illegal. I just—" "You implied it," Grace interrupted. "You put a question mark where a period belonged. And people will remember the question long after you print the truth." The young man swallowed. "Howard said. Howard's a man trying to hide what he did," she said. "And you helped him." Her tone wasn't sharp. It was steady, like a sermon. Then she stood. "Tomorrow morning I expect a retraction. Not for me. For every woman who's been told she's too strong, too bold, too much, she started to leave, then turned back, a small smile tugging at her lips. Oh, and next time you want a story, she said, write about how a black woman saved a business that men nearly ran into the ground. The next day, the retraction came. Loud, public, and humbling. After reviewing documents provided by Ridgway Motors, we find no evidence of wrongdoing by Mrs. Grace Williams. Grace didn't gloat. She didn't need to. The truth spoke for itself. Customers poured in that weekend, many just to shake her hand. One older gentleman, a retired postal worker, smiled and said, "You remind me of my mama." Didn't matter what they said, she always stood taller. Grace smiled back, her throat tight. "That's the best thing anyone's ever told me." Later that evening, after the crowds left, she walked the floor with Lydia. The showroom lights glowed warm against the polished cars. The sound of soft jazz played from the speakers, slow and nostalgic. "You ever think about quitting?" Lydia asked. Grace laughed gently. "Every day. But then I remember who's watching. Your customers? My sons, my grandbaby. And girls like you." Lydia looked down, shy. Grace rested a hand on her shoulder. "When people try to tear you down, it's usually because they see how high you're standing. Don't let them bend your spine." That night, Grace sat by her office window watching snow drift under the streetlights. She thought of all the women who'd been told no, all the doors that had been closed and locked in their faces. And she thought of how, somehow, she'd found the courage to build her own door, then hold it open for others. She took out a notepad and wrote, "The measure of power isn't how many people serve you, it's how many you lift." Then she smiled, tore the page out and pinned it to her wall. Outside, the city shimmered in white silence, and Ridgway Motors stood bright against the dark, a beacon of what happens when grace meets grit. For the first time in her life, Grace Williams didn't just feel successful, she felt whole. Spring came early that year. The snow melted into silver puddles, the air soft and kind again. Inside Ridgway Motors, the windows were thrown open, sunlight spilling across the floor like a blessing. Grace Williams stood near the front desk, a cup of tea warming her hands. She watched customers laugh with salesmen, watched Lydia greet a young couple, watched the world inside her dealership breathe with new life. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to pause. It wasn't pride she felt. It was peace, a quiet, steady peace she'd built with her own two hands. That afternoon, her son Marcus dropped by. He was a tall man now, 41, with the same calm eyes and steady voice his mother had taught him. "Still running the empire, huh?" he teased, looking around. Grace smiled, trying to keep it from falling apart. He laughed. "Mom, you built something people actually believe in. You know how rare that is?" She shrugged, sipping her tea. "I just wanted a place that treated people right." Marcus leaned on the counter, serious now. "You did more than that. You showed folks what power looks like when it's handled with grace." She chuckled softly. "You practiced that line?" He grinned. "Maybe." As the day went on, the dealership buzzed with its usual rhythm. Phones ringing, laughter echoing, the scent of polish and coffee in the air. But then, something unexpected happened. A black sedan pulled into the lot. One Grace didn't recognize. Out stepped a man in his 60s, gray hair slicked back, eyes cautious but kind. He paused by the entrance, straightened his tie, and walked in. "Mrs. Williams?" he said. Grace turned. "Yes? My name's Frank Douglas," he said. "I used to own this place before Mr. Benson." The name pulled her upright. "Oh?" he nodded. "I just wanted to see it for myself. The papers said you turned it around." Grace smiled. "We've been trying." He looked around, slow and thoughtful. "When I ran this place, I tried to keep things fair. But somewhere along the line, that got lost." Then he turned to her, eyes warm. "It's good to see it in honest hands again." Grace didn't know what to say. She just nodded, humbled. Before he left, he said, "My father used to say, you can't change the world, but you can change the corner you stand on. Looks like you've done just that." Grace watched him go, the words landing deep in her chest. That evening, The staff gathered for their 6-month celebration. Nothing fancy, just food, laughter, and stories told loud and long. Grace stood by the wall, watching her people. Lydia raised a toast. To the woman who taught us that leadership doesn't shout, it listens. Everyone clapped and cheered, glasses lifted high. Grace laughed, shaking her head. You're all too kind. But when they quieted down, she spoke softly. You know, when I first walked in here, I was invisible to this place, and maybe that was a gift, because it reminded me how powerful it feels to be seen. That's all anyone wants, to be seen, to be respected. That's what we've built together. She looked around the room, faces glowing in the warm light. This isn't just a business anymore. It's a promise. The room went still, the kind of silence that feels sacred. Then someone started clapping, and soon everyone was on their feet. Later that night, after the laughter faded and the lights dimmed, Grace stayed behind. She walked through the quiet showroom one last time, fingertips tracing the cool metal of a car hood. The moonlight poured through the windows, bathing everything in silver. She thought about the journey, the humiliation, the doubt, the long nights spent fighting for something she couldn't even name at first. And now, standing there, she realized what it was. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't power. It was dignity, and the freedom that comes from never again asking permission to stand tall. Grace walked outside, the spring air gentle against her face. The city was quiet, save for a few cars whispering down the road. Across the street, she saw a young woman in scrubs waiting for the bus, shoulders slumped after what must have been a long shift. Grace smiled, remembering herself all those years ago, fighting the same invisible battles. As the bus pulled up, Grace whispered under her breath, "Keep going, honey. The world won't always see you, but you'll learn to make it look." The next morning, a small plaque appeared on the front wall of Ridgeway Motors. It read, "Built with grace, for everyone who was ever told they couldn't." No name beneath it. Just those words, and every person who walked through those doors, rich, poor, young, old, felt the truth of them, even if they didn't know the story behind it, because they could feel her spirit there. Strong, steady, unbreakable. Grace Williams didn't just buy a dealership. She reclaimed something bigger, her voice, her worth, her place in the world, and from that day on, whenever the wind swept through the open glass doors and stirred the scent of new cars and coffee, it carried a whisper that everyone could feel but no one could quite explain. Grace was here.